あ。
We can attach this fog to a directional light to more accurately represent the sun. Let's go ahead and do that now. First, select our directional light in the Details panel. Then, let's search for fog. You should now see Atmospheric Fog Sunlight. Let's go ahead and check it on. Immediately, you should see the color of the fog adjust to our skylight's color. If we select our directional light and rotate it, you should also see that the sunspot follows correctly, and it even adjusts accurately as the sun dips towards the horizon. The next item intrinsic to lighting is our reflection capture. Let's add a spherical reflection capture from the Modes menu. Simply search for reflection and you should see it. Now, set its position to 0, 0, to help your scene come to life, and an easy mesh in our project to start to create something rather cool. To give you an idea what is possible in the kit you now have at your disposal, this is where I took my level to. But I did give myself a nice walled area to work with, and using the assets in the list, you should be able to do something similar. Don't feel pressured to make a masterpiece, but do spend some time trying to make something visually interesting. So as we move deeper into the lighting, we have something more dynamic than a floor to work with. Have some fun. Spend maybe 15-20 minutes or so. For the scene you see before you, I spent about an hour, but yours does not have to be this complete. Have fun, play, and I will see you when you are ready to continue in the next tutorial. With a little effort, you probably have a scene now looking something like this. You may have some nice forms starting to show, and hopefully the landscape you created is a bit dynamic. If you got really into it, you may have even started adding in some little details like statues, barrels, etc. There are also some things you probably struggled with a little bit. Hopefully, however, you are happy with what is in front of you and you feel a bit more confident dragging things into your level and adjusting their positions, rotations, and scales as needed. If so, nice work. Unless you jumped ahead and added in more lights, the lighting should be rather harsh and the shadows are black. We also have nothing at all dynamic with our lighting. It's just flat and kind of boring looking. The most glaring issue is that we have no fill light of any kind to take out these shadows. We only have a direction light. Therefore, if in shadow, there is no light hitting it at all. In real time, it is very difficult to calculate that kind of light. Traditionally, that light is called bounced light. We do, however, have a type of light that happens to be purpose-built to help us with that. It is called a skylight, and it can be also found in the Modes panel. It will give us the ambient lighting we need, so let's drag that in, and let's set its position to 0, 0, 400. Amazing. Our shadows are already vastly improved. Great. Now, it may be tempting to make adjustments to the skylight to control its ambient power. I would suggest not doing that, however. Generally, the defaults will be correct and give a good indication that the lighting itself needs to be adjusted, not the ambient properties. Now that we have ambient light, we will begin to see our next issue. As we move around our scene and go towards darker areas and lighter areas, you will likely notice that the overall exposure seems to be compensating. That's because it is. And as cool a feature as it may be, it is not very helpful when you're trying to get your light balanced. We need a stable exposure in order to get our lighting right. In order to control this aspect of our rendering and many others, we have a useful tool called a post-process volume. With it, we can affect all cameras in the scene from a singular control. Let's go ahead and grab one from our Modes panel and drop it into our scene. Just search for Post, and it should come right up. Great. Now let's go ahead and set it. Its position to 0, 0, 0. Next, let's slide on down to the lens section and look for the exposure min and max. Let's set them both to 1. This will force adaptive exposure to be locked at the default exposure. Lastly, let's do a quick search in the post-process volume for infinite, and make sure that infinite extent is enabled. This will give it complete domain over our level rather than contained to a specific area. This will give it complete domain over our level and make sure that infinite extent is enabled. This will give it complete domain over our level rather than contained to a specific area. Now if we look around, we should have a very stable exposure. Excellent. The next addition we will make to our scene will be to add a sky sphere. Simply type sky in the mode search panel and you should see BP_sky_sphere. Once found, drag it into your scene and set its position also to 0, 0, 0. Great. Like the atmospheric fog, the sky sphere is best when linked to a directional light. Let's go ahead and use the drop-down labeled directional light actor to do that. Just select your directional light and you should see the change. Now we have a nicer sky that we have more control over. Feel free to tinker with the controls, but I'm going to leave this all at default. Excellent. At this point, we have a perfectly acceptable environment light. Setup. We just need to dial it in. Before we do that, however, let's make sure all of our elements for lighting are organized so that we can easily adjust things. In the World Outliner, control-click to multi-select our sky sphere, direction light, atmospheric fog, and skylight. Next, right-click and select Move to New Folder. Name that folder World Lighting. The X shadows are black. We also have nothing at all dynamic with our lighting. We also have nothing be rather harsh the head and end. If so, nice work. Unless right up. Great. Now let's exposure. Excellent. Here is best when excellent. At this point, we have click and select Move to New Folder. Name that folder World Lighting. The exclamation point will ensure it stays on top of our list so we can easily access it for overall lighting setup. Perfect. Now, starting with the direction light, let's adjust our brightness. Let's set it down to 1. That should give us a nice duskish intensity. Excellent. Things are already feeling a bit better. Using the rotate tool, let's get our sun to be situated closer to the horizon so it feels a bit more like dusk lighting. You will notice that as you rotate the directional light, the sunspot no longer updates. Simply disable your sky sphere for the moment, and you will be able to see your sunspot update normally. Once you get your sun in a nice low position on the horizon, simply re-enable your sky sphere and click the refresh update normally. You'll notice that as you rotate the directional light, the sunspot no longer updates. Simply disable your sky sphere for the moment, and you will be able to see your sunspot update normally. Once you get your sun in a nice low position on the horizon, simply re-enable your sky sphere and click the Refresh Material button. Perfect. The sun is right where I want it. Next, let's go ahead and get our sun spot to start acting a little more like a sun, alive. If we look into the sky and take note of our sun, it's okay, but it certainly lacks any kind of charisma. To give it some life, let's jump over to our direction light and enable Light Shaft Occlusion. And Light Shaft Bloom. This will give us a halo around our sun. If you drift around your scene, you should see that the obscuring objects help define the shape and cast of the light. Awesome, but wow, it's ugly and wildly out of control. No worries though. If we jump into our sky sphere, we can adjust the intensity quite easily by setting sun brightness to around 1. Then, back in our directional light, we can fine-tune the look with our bloom scale. In short order, order, you should have some beautiful God rays streaming into in the look with our bloom scale. In short order, you should have some beautiful God rays streaming into your scene. Excellent. Okay, now that we have our scene looking fairly good, we just need to add some dynamism to our scene. Right now we have no visual movement, nor do we have much interplay of light. It is sorely needed here, so in the next tutorial I'm going to introduce you to the idea and concept of an actor. With actors, we will create and place some highly engaging fiery lamps to add that last bit of magic to our scene. Ready to finish this up? Meet me in the next and final tutorial to learn how. Okay, so we are on the final stretch. Hopefully at this point you are having some fun and finding success working your way through such a large tool set. Now, the last major component I want to introduce you to in this short introductory course is the concept of an actor. To keep it simple while also remaining more or less accurate, let's fit it into the world of a movie set. So far, we have a level, which we can think of as a blank empty space in which to build our set. The set itself is mostly comprised of static meshes, lights, and other non-moving assets. Now we are going to introduce an actor. Actors are made up of the same things that go into a level, but because they exist as a singular entity, it is easy to give them some simple life. We will start by dipping our toe in the water just so we can start to see what's possible. But as you advance your skill, you will eventually be able to make extremely complex interactive elements which can have far more than just a little life. Okay, so let's dig in. Let's start by ensuring our content browser is at the root level and that our filters are all disabled. Okay, cool. Now let's go ahead and right-click to create a new folder. Let's call this one BP_actors for blueprint. Actors. Great. Now, inside that folder, let's right-click and select Blueprint class, then Actor from the subsequent menu. Excellent. Let's name it BP_lamp. Great. Let's open it up. Now, an actor is a kind of container much like the level, so we will need to populate our lamp kind of container much like the lamp. Great. Let's open it up. Now an actor is a kind of container much like the level, so we will need to populate our lamp actor with some elements. In the content browser, use the search to locate iron torch. Once found, to locate iron torch. Once found, drag it into the BP lamp viewport. It's a little tricky, but with some finesse, I'm sure you'll get it. Okay, so now we have the torch in the actor. Great. Now let's go ahead and search the content folder for P_fire. Drag this into the window as well. You can maximize this window now, as we won't need any more content from the browser. Now, the last element we will need will be a light source. In the Components menu, found here on the top left of the actor window, let's add a point light. Great. Now, you will notice some similarities to our normal level editor. On the top left, we have a list of assets related to this actor. This is similar to the World Outliner. On the right, we have a detail panel, just actor. This is similar to the World Outliner. On the right, we have a detail panel, just like what we will have in the level editor. We also have some new tools on the bottom left. These are for using Blueprint. Let's not worry about that stuff quite yet. Okay, cool. Now, let's go ahead and ensure our hierarchy is flat. It's easy to have them nest accidentally, so let's go ahead and make sure they're unparented. To unparent a nested object, simply drag it to the root itself, and say attach. Okay, great. All my elements are now at the root level. Now let's go ahead and move our flames up where it sits correctly in the basket. Nice. Okay, now let's do the same for our light. This time I'm going to go a little bit above. Okay, perfect. Let's compile, save. And close the window. For now, just think of the compile button as a save to game button. When you make changes, you want the engine to pick them all up. You need to do both save and compile for that to happen. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and close this window for a moment. Now in the BP Actors folder, let's go ahead and drop our BP lamp into the scene. Feel free to replicate it a few times as your scene requires. Now in the BP Actors folder, let's go ahead and drop our BP lamp into the scene. Feel free to replicate it a few times as your scene requires. Excellent. Looking good, huh? Now let's take one more step to give it just a tad more life. Okay, reopen the blueprint lamp. Now click on the Event Graph tab. In it, we can program our life. Okay, reopen the blueprint lamp. Now click on the Event Graph tab. In it, we can program all sorts of things, and in this lesson, we are going to do something extremely simple, making the lights flicker. To navigate in the event graph, right-click and drag to move around. Use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. Okay, so if we look, there are some rather useful nodes available to us right from the start. These starting nodes are called events. Events trigger actions. In this case, we will use the Begin Play event to get our lights to flicker. Let's first drag off from the event triangle on the Begin Play event node. This will allow us to call an action. Let go of the drag and search for the term delay in the resulting window. You should find a node called delay. Now the delay node will be expecting a duration input from the event triangle on the Begin Play event node. This will allow us to call an action. Let go of the drag and search for the term delay in the resulting window. You should find a node called delay. Now the delay node will be expecting a duration input. Drag off that input and search for random and locate the random float in range node. Once found, set its values to 0 for the min and 0.2 for the max. Great. We now have a delay that will wait for a random duration between 0 and 0.2 seconds. Next, let's drag in a reference to our point light. Great. Now let's pull out from the seconds. Next, let's drag in a reference to our point light. Great. Now let's pull out from the point light and search for the term intensity. Now let's copy the random float node and paste it near our intensity node and set its min and max values to 9. Now let's copy the random float node and paste it near our intensity node and set its min and max values to 900 and 3000 respectively. Now let's connect our delay node's event line to our intensity node. Okay, great. Our graph should look something like this. As we can see, we first wait for a random amount of time. Then we will tell our light to adjust its intensity to a random brightness. Now we just need to repeat that indefinitely. To do this, just drag off the end of our intensity node and plug it back into the front of the delay node. Now we have created an endless loop which will constantly change the intensity and the duration of time. Before we leave, let's set our light's attenuation radius to something a bit more practical. Let's set it to something like 500. While we are here, let's also set the light color to something a bit more orangish and fiery. Great. I think that should do it. Now let's save, compile, and close our actor. In order to see the actor run, we need to hit play. That should do it. Now let's save, compile, and close our actor. In order to see the actor run, we need to hit play as it only executes during runtime. Now you can see we have a nice believable light flicker. Pretty cool, huh? Without getting too deeply into the subject, we have one last task in order to finalize the light in our scene. We need to bake our lighting. If you look in the shadow areas, you may still notice that some of our shadows say preview in them. To bake our lighting, simply click the side of the Build button and drag down to Build Lighting. This will take all of our assets and bake in the lighting information. As you progress, you will certainly want to delve into this topic, especially if lighting is a critical task for you. Okay, cool. Once our lighting is built, you should see your lighting improved and the preview missing from the shadows. If you move objects into your scene, however, be aware that you will need to rebake your lighting. Anyhow, you now have all the tools you need to get started in UE4. When tweaked just right, this lesson should provide you with a beautifully lit, high-quality scene. This is where I got mine to with just a few lighting tweaks. Feel free to adjust, add, and continue at your own leisure. Okay, so that is going to conclude your first hour in Unreal. Hopefully UE4 is a little less intimidating than it had been, and that you feel a bit more willing to delve in deeper. There is a lot to learn in here, and even after this first hour, we have yet to scratch the surface of what's possible. That said, you now have some chops to start digging in and not being lost in a foreign world. Thanks for letting me guide you into Unreal. It was a pleasure, and I hope to see you again in future tutorials.
Hello, my name is Matthew Wadstein, and in this series we're going to cover the editor basics. We're going to give you an overview of how the editor is laid out as well as how to customize it. Then we're going to go and work on the viewport. What options do we have available inside the viewport and how do we navigate around it? The world outliner, how it works, what is it good for? The details panel. What does this do and what features does it give us when we use it? The modes panel. What available modes do we have when working in the editor? And then an overview of the place mode. The content browser. What is this giant thing for and how do we customize it to make it a little less unwieldy? And then finally, the main toolbar, our shortcuts to our common actions. The Unreal Engine 4 editor, which we can see here, is going to be our default interface for working with the engine and our projects. So this is our default layout. I've created a project and we're going to go ahead and cover the layout using this project. As we can see here, we have a few different windows. On the left we have our modes window. This is where we can add some items quickly. We can work with like our landscape and our geometry. At the top we have our main toolbar. This is where we can do things like saving our current project, going into plain editor mode, and then also testing the project out. In the middle we have our viewport. This is our main viewport into our map so we can see what we're working with. At the bottom we have our content browser. Basically think of this as our file explorer for our assets inside of our project. Top right we have our world outliner. This is an overview of all the individual items we have inside of this level. And then at the bottom we have our details panel. And this is where we can see the individual parts for our items that we've clicked on so we can adjust them if needed. Now the default layout is customizable. Everything in here is a window. We can move a window by clicking on the tab and dragging it and dropping it wherever we want it. We can resize windows by clicking on the dividers between windows and moving them to where we want them. We can hide the tab. So for example, I like where the content browser is. I can right click and hide the tab and now it's going to collapse it. Or we can click on that little arrow, unhide the tab, and then that will allow us to move it to the new spot. Little arrow, unhide the browser is. I can right click and hide the tab and now it's going to collapse it. Or we can click on that little arrow, unhide the tab, and then that will allow us to move it to the new spot. Now if we get to the point where we've moved things around and we don't really like it, we want to go back to defaults, we can go to Window, Reset Layout. After it saves, it's going to go ahead and reset the project and put our layout back to the defaults. Now there are a few hidden things that we have access to that are helpful if needed. In the top right we have the name of our project, in this case Editor Overview. We can see the version number of the engine we're using for this project, as well as any branch. So for example, I'm using the launcher version of 4.18, and we can see that here. Next to this, we have a little hat icon. This is for our tutorials. We can click on that, and we're now presented with a list of tutorials. We could, for example, welcome to the editor, and this will walk us through some basics of the editor, like we're covering now. This is useful if you need some quick information for learning a topic you might not know yet. In the top left, we have our more common menu options. We have our File menu. This is where we can load and save assets as well as maps. This is where we get access to things like cooking our content for our project so that we could then package the project into the appropriate platform that we want. Our Edit is our undoing, copying, pasting, and duplicating, but also quick access to our preferences and settings, as well as our Plugins window for adding and removing plugins to our project. The Windows menu is for Windows. This is where we can get access to things like maybe a duplicate details panel. You can dock this extra one somewhere else and now have 2 details panels. We have our developer tools, things like our debugging and analyzing systems, as well as our saving and resetting layout options. Finally, we have our Help menu. This is where we can get quick access to our documentation, our references, quick links to our Answer Hub and support forums, and other useful things. Understanding the basic layout is a great way to get started. Up next, we're going to cover the viewport. The viewport is our view into our world. It allows us to see what is inside of our level, manipulate those items, and basically visually work with everything. So we're going to take a quick look at it. Our viewport is this giant item in the middle of our screen where we can view our project. We can see what we're working on. And it has a few options. In the top left corner, we have our viewport options. This controls the way the viewport works and what we can see inside of it. For example, we can toggle things like real time and frames per second on. We can adjust our field of view if we want to change it to better match our project. We can toggle cinematic preview on and on. This gives us play controls if we're viewing a cinematic. We have game view, which I'll cover shortly in more detail, and immersive mode, which is basically full screen for the viewport and can be toggled here or with the F11 key. Below this, we have bookmarks. This gives us the ability to jump quickly from one spot to another. You can see here I have 3 bookmarks. I can click on each of them and jump directly to a bookmark, or use the 1, 2, and 3 key on my keyboard to jump to preset bookmarks. If I move my view to somewhere I want, use the control and the number key, I can now have a new bookmark. I can jump from 3 to my new bookmark of 4, which you can see here. I now have a new bookmark I set using the control option. You can also clear them here. Layouts gives us the ability to change how many viewports we have available. By default, we have 1. We can go to layouts, and we can have 2, 3, or 4 in different configurations. These are just the defaults. I can go here, I can choose 3 panes. Now we have 3 viewports. Each viewport is independent. They can all change the way that they appear, as well as they're shaded. So for example, this one is top wireframe. I could change that to maybe left and unlit mode, and now I would have a left unlit viewport independent of the other 2 viewports. I'm going to go ahead and reset these back to default. Now the options next to this are the way our viewports look and the way they are shaded, and also visualization options. So by default, we have our perspective view. We can change this to any of our shaded and also visualization options. So by default, we have our perspective view. We can change this to any of the orthographic views by using the shortcuts or by clicking the options. And then we have our view mode. By default, we're going to have lit. We can change this to unlit, or we can change this to wireframe. or any of the other modes that allow us to better visualize our options. And all these details are covered in the documentation. Lastly, we have show. This changes the way the editor shows different parts of your project, and this is for the editor only. So for example, maybe I don't want to see the grid. The grid is this item over here that we use for snapping and various other placement. If I don't want to see it anymore, I can go to Show Grid, and now the grid will disappear. I can go back to Show Grid, and now I can view it. Now by default, we're in the editor mode. This is where we can see things like our icons for our actors. We have our game view. It's the G button, or clicking here, and now you'll notice our icons disappear. The game view tries to give you a more game view or project view looking view. It's very similar to if you were to preview it in the editor or standalone mode. It's a quick way of visualizing what it might look like when you run the project. They are separate views. Editor and game view are separate, and the show options are independent. Let me go back to this view. I'm going to grab this material and make my walls glow. Now if I'm working in here, I might start to have a problem because now I have this overwhelming bloom, and it's going to make my level design a little difficult. So I might want to go into Show, Post-Processing Bloom, and now it's a little better. Now I don't have the bloom effect, I can work on my editor. But now I want to preview what it looks like. Well, I can go into Play, and it's going to show me what it looks like. Or I could go into Play in Standalone, and it's going to compile a few things and show me what it looks like. But maybe I want to see it quicker. Well, I'll hit my G key, and now I can see my bloom is re-enabled. I've disabled Game View, I'm in Editor View, Show, Post-Processing, Bloom is unchecked. I will enable Game View, I will go to Show, Post-Processing, and now Bloom is checked. These settings are independent of each other, and they are separate for those views only, so keep that in mind. You could have both of them not show the bloom, and maybe you just simply don't want the grid showing when you're in Game View, but it's fine, we're in Editor. It's your choice, it's your option. The upper right controls the way we work with the items inside of our view. If I click on an item, we'll click on this cube for example, we get our manipulator widget. And by default it's going to look like this, and it's going to allow us to move or translate this object. Up here in the top right we are showing we can select and translate this object, or we can use the W key as a shortcut. Next to that is rotate, or the E key, and scale, or the R key. So we can do W, E, and R to change through our tools, or the space bar to toggle to the next one. Once we have one we want, we can click on one of the manipulators here. Z is vertical, Y is going to be horizontal, usually left and right, and X is going to usually be forward and backwards, or the red one. We can click on them and move the item as such. You can also click on the combined widget. For in this case, we'll click on these two. It's going to be our Y and our Z. It allows us to move it on the Y and the Z at the same time. Now you may notice it's snapping in the world view. I move this item around based on the world's X, Y, and Z. If I click on the manipulator next to this, this will toggle between world and local view. So let's say we take this item, we're going to rotate it, and now it's going to be angled like this. If I want to move this in the direction the item is facing, I need to use local view. World view, relative to the world. Click the icon local view. It's relative to the items itself and its local axis. I'll go ahead and reset that back to default. Next to this we have our snapping option. We have how the item snaps when we translate, how the item snaps when we rotate, and how the item snaps when we move it. By default, it's going to be set to grid snapping. Surface snapping is an option you can enable here. Grid snapping means the item will snap to the grid that we can see here. Now I have a cube. We'll go ahead and we'll look at our cube here, and we can see that it's kind of off. It's not really snapped to this grid. If we were to move it, it's going to look weird. Well, my snapping's set to 100, and my grid is, as you can see, is set to 100. But my X and the Y aren't multiples of 100. It's kind of off. Let me change my snapping to something like 10. Now my grid will get smaller, and now you can see it moves in increments of 10. Maybe set to increments of 5, and the grid will adjust accordingly to whatever you've set it up as. And these are adjustable inside of the editor preferences. This is for toggling on and off the translate snapping, so you can see now it will not snap. We have the same options here for our rotational snapping and degrees, and our scaling snapping and the units for scale snap. Lastly, we have the ability to change the speed at which our camera moves. Well, this isn't very helpful because we don't know how to use that. We don't know how to actually move our camera. Well, it's pretty simple. If you've played a first-person shooter game, or you've used a recent digital content creation software package, maybe Maya or Moto or Max, it has the same layout. The right mouse button toggles the ability to look around. I'm holding the right mouse button, and we can now look around. When I let go, I move my mouse. The W, A, S, and D keys allow us to move left, right, forwards, and backwards relative to our way our viewport camera is looking. So you can see I'm flying around by holding the right mouse button and using my W, A, S, and D keys. And if we want, we can use the Q and the E key to go down and up. Now if you're wanting to move faster or slower, now we can adjust our camera speed. But let's say we go to like 6 and we're going pretty fast, but we want to get in close, and now we're going too fast, but we don't want to let go of our view. You can use the mouse wheel while you're holding the right mouse button to speed up or slow down by rotating it in or out, and that gives you a faster or slower view. Lastly, mouse wheel while you're holding the right mouse button to speed up or slow down. 6 and we're going pretty fast, but we want to get in close, and now we're going too fast, but we don't want to let go of our view. You can use the mouse wheel while you're holding the right mouse button to speed up or slow down by rotating it in or out, and that gives you a faster or slower view. Lastly, we have the focus. So let's say we are somewhere else and we want to find something. Let's say we are in a different part of our map and we want to get back to our player. If we know where our player start is in our hierarchy, or we can see it, we can click on that item to have it selected, hit the F to focus key, and now you're going to go and zoom in and focus on that object. Up next, we're going to cover the world outliner. It's basically an outline of all the actors available to us in our world.
いいので、これで失礼します。お疲れ様です。